working on this quiz here, guys, which is 10 questions. I want y'all to work on these 10 questions. And then we're going to continue on with the alveoli part of the lecture. I wasn't recording when I said that. Okay, guys, it is now 50 after. We're going to take a 10-minute break. At 2 o'clock, we're going to come back and answer these questions and continue on with the lecture. All right, I'm going to pause the recording again while you're on break. All right, we're going over. Number 1 is the corona. Number 2, what is the opening that leads to the larynx? What is that opening that leads to the larynx, Christian? All right, Stephanie.
It's the glottis.
I was still here. I'm sorry.
Okay, what is it?
No, she can go. I'll get the next one.
What is it, Stephanie?
The glottis.
The glottis. All right, Christian, what's number 3? How many, Christian? How many centimeters in 1 inch, Christian?
2.54.
2.54 centimeters, good. All right, number 4, Talicia, what is a PVC?
Premature ventricular contraction.
Good, premature ventricular contraction. All right, number 5, Charisma.
What is the generation 0 of the tree?
What is generation 0 of the tracheobronchial tree?
What the trachea?
Trachea. It's the trachea. Number 6. Cassidy, what are the 3 functions of the nose?
Warms, humidifies, and filters gas.
Good. Number 6. All right, number 7. You might not know this one yet because we're going to go over this one today. What is sputum made of? Did anybody find that? Not just mucus. So mucus and oral secretions. Mucus and oral secretions is what sputum is. Mucus and oral secretions. So when the mucus comes from the lungs and mixes with the oral secretions, it's now called sputum. All right. Let's see who else is on here. Yasmin, what is the normal body temperature?
98.6.
Good, 98.6. Brittany, what is the structure that allows for speech? Vocal cords. All right. And Lori, what is the function of the epiglottis? Good. Prevents food or anything going into the trachea. Protects the trachea upon swallowing. Okay, protects the trachea when swallowing. All right. All right, good. So that was a little quiz. These are the answers here.
So for number 9, I put the larynx. Is that not right?
The vocal cords.
I did too.
The vocal cords. That's what they're looking for. The vocal cords. All right. Stop that share and continue on. All right, so now we're going to get into the actual alveoli. Okay, the actual alveoli. I showed you a picture of alveoli yesterday, and we'll show that picture again as we get to it. But the alveoli, let's see here. Okay, after the respiratory bronchioles, which is where the magic starts, right? We said the magic happens in the respiratory bronchioles, right? We're down to the respiratory bronchioles, and that's when you start to see alveoli, okay? The respiratory bronchioles and the alveoli are in the area of the lung called the parenchyma. The parenchyma, okay? So you have alveolar ducts Alveolar ducts are alveoli separated by septal walls. The alveoli are separated by septal or septal walls. Okay. Then you have the actual alveolar sacs. Okay, alveolar sacs, which is generation number 23. Like I said, you don't have to remember that generation part. But alveolar sacs, they come in clusters. Okay, the alveolar sacs come in little clusters. Right? There are clusters of 15 to 20 alveoli make up an alveolar sac. Clusters of 15 to 20 alveoli make up alveolar sac. Okay. Now, the wall of one alveoli is the wall of the next one to it. Okay. They share a wall. They share a wall. Right. So this is why they're able to communicate between each other. In the video, it showed you how the oxygen leaves out of the alveoli and goes into or diffuses into the capillary, right? And the CO2 that is in the capillary blood diffuses into the alveoli, and that allows you to exhale the CO2. But what about alveoli next to another alveoli? Well, they share a wall. They share the same wall, but they communicate with each other. Okay, and that communication is called collateral ventilation. So it's kind of like saying if one alveoli say, I need a little bit of oxygen, let me borrow some of that oxygen over to give to this capillary, right? Or I got a little bit of extra CO2, let me give you some of that CO2 so you can help get rid of it, right? They collateral ventilation, they ventilate with each other, all right? So you have one alveoli next to another one with a hole in between, and that's how they communicate. That communication is called collateral ventilation. All right. Now let's look at the specifics of the alveoli itself. It is an airspace that contains capillary walls. Remember, I told you if you think of a bunch of grapes being the alveoli and you put them down into some fishnet stockings, right? Those stockings are the capillary walls, and they're wrapped around all around the alveoli. Okay. There are 300 to 600 million alveoli in your lungs, in the adult lungs. They have about 300 to 600 million alveoli, made up of simple squamous epithelium. Now, that hole that I talked about in which alveoli can communicate with each other is called pores of Cont. Very important term. The pores of Cont is the little hole in between the alveoli that allows them to communicate with each other. That communication is called collateral ventilation, right? That communication between two alveoli is called collateral ventilation, right? That collateral ventilation happens via the pores of Cont. Okay, pores of Cont. That's different than the canal of Lambert. Canals of Lambert allow the alveoli to communicate with the bronchiole. Okay, remember I showed you the bronchiole on the board yesterday and had little holes there, which they're able to communicate with the actual alveoli ducts through the canals of Lambert. All right, that's different than the pores of Cont. They are two different holes, okay, or spaces. The canal of Lambert is the space from the alveoli or alveoli ducts and the bronchiole. That's how they communicate with the bronchiole. But then the alveoli themselves can communicate with each other through the pores of Cont. Okay? Pores of Cont. Now, the alveoli has three types of cells that are very, very important. Three types of cells that are very, very important. Type 1, type 2, and type 3. Type 1, type 2, and type 3 are the cells of the alveoli. Now, each cell has a responsibility or a job, and you're going to have to know the job of each cell, okay? If I ask you, this is going on, what cell is doing that? This is being produced, what cell is producing it, all right? Now, type 1. Type 1 cell allows for gas diffusion. Gas diffusion. It makes up of 95% of the alveolar cell is type 1 cell. So that's most of the cell. Most of the alveolar cell, the alveoli, is made up of type 1 cells. They allow for gas diffusion. Now, what do I mean by gas diffusion? What gas is diffusing in and out of it? Oxygen and CO2. So in order for oxygen and CO2 to get out of the alveoli, it has to diffuse through the wall. And that cell makes up the outer wall of the alveoli and allows for that diffusion. Okay? So if there is a disease process with the type 1 alveolar cell, what do you think could be happening? What would manifest if there's a disease process of the type 1 cells of the alveoli? What do you think what are some problems that could manifest in the person? Too much CO2. Yeah, okay. Too much CO2 could be building up because it's not getting into the alveoli to get out. What's something else? Or what's the other thing that happened? Good. Oxygen not leaving the alveoli, getting into the arterial blood. So it's returning to the body void, right? It's not picking up oxygen. That's a shunt, right? That's a shunt. Whenever the blood, remember I told you, whenever the blood goes from the right side of the heart to the left side of the heart without picking up oxygen, that's a shunt, okay? That's a shunt. So something's wrong, right? It could be either the type 1 cells are acting up, there could be a pressure problem, there could be a ventilation problem, a lot of things that you're going to have to kind of figure out what's causing this shunt, okay? But we do know that if the type 1 cell is responsible for the gas to exchange, and the type 1 cell is all diseased up, then you're going to have a problem with gas exchange. The body is going to be building up CO2, which is called acidosis, because CO2 is an acid, right? They're not ventilating because CO2 means CO2, aka acid, aka ventilation, aka respiratory, aka capnia, aka carbia, right? You got to go back and look at those, make sure you know that. All right. So if the CO2 is building up in the body and it cannot get into the alveoli to be exhaled, then the body is starting to become acidotic, right? It's becoming very, very acid because it can't get rid of it. And CO2 is an acid and it's building and building and building. Okay. And so that's important. Type 1 cell, very important because most of the alveoli is made up of type 1 cells and they allow for gas diffusion. Okay. Type 2 cells. The type 2 cells secrete a substance called surfactant. They secrete a substance called surfactant. And the surfactant decreases the surface tension of the alveoli. Surfactant decreases the surface tension of the alveoli. Okay, surfactant decreases the surface tension of the alveoli. That is produced by the type 2 cell of the alveoli. It has a nickname, the Clara cell. The type 2 cell has a nickname, and that nickname is also known as the Clara cell. And they are responsible for producing surfactant. All right. Now, why do we need surfactant? Why would I need to decrease the surface tension in the alveoli? Why do I even need the surface tension to be? I mean, why would it even be a problem? Well, I'm about to show you. This is why alveoli surface, the tension in the alveoli can be a problem for you. All right, so let's look at it. I want you to go back to your days of daydreaming. And if you have, we're going to talk about raindrops. Right? you are on a rainy day, just daydreaming, right? Looking at the window and it's raining. You ever remember noticing how you have a large water drop sitting right here? And then you look up and here's a little bitty raindrop and it's coming down. What happens when that little raindrop hits that big one? It's going to suck it in. Okay. The surface tension in this raindrop is higher than the surface tension in the little one. Therefore, when that little raindrop makes it to the big one, it's going to suck it in. Okay. So if you remember looking at it, it not only just makes a bigger raindrop, it goes in. When it gets close to it and touches it, it sucks it in. Okay. That's because of the law of Laplace. Okay. You're going to learn him when we get to physics. Okay. The law of Laplace talks about surface tension. Okay. If the large raindrop is there and a small one is coming, when a small one touches the large one, it's going to suck it in. All right. Now, what about this? Now let's think about alveoli. Let's think about the same principle for alveoli. Now let's look at the alveoli. So say I have a bunch of alveoli right next to each other. What about this small one here? The law of Laplace says that if this small alveoli is touching this larger alveoli, what should happen? It should suck it in or collapse it, okay? Because of the surface tension, larger spheres tend to collapse the smaller ones because of surface tension, right? And so they can't sit next to each other. Because if they do, the larger one is going to pull it in, okay, and collapse it. And we don't want that because when you have alveolar collapse, what's not happening? No gas exchange, okay, because that's where the magic happens, right? So if you have a bunch of collapsed alveoli, there's no gas exchange going on in that alveoli. That's called atelectasis when it's collapsed, okay? And so your creator made a special cell in your alveoli called Pleura cells or type 2 cells. Those type 2 cells produce what? Surfactant. Surfactant will decrease surface tension. And that allows the big alveoli to communicate with the small alveoli via the what? How do they communicate? With that little hole called between two alveoli? Pores of Cont. So the surfactant decreases the surface tension and allows a larger alveoli to communicate with a smaller alveoli via the pore of Cont without collapsing it. Because now they both have the same surface tension. Same concept is when you blow bubbles. When your kids play with bubbles and you do the bubbles, you ever seen a big bubble floating with a little one sitting on top? Because it's surfactant. It's the same material as surfactant. That's why I was able to do that. If it was water, it wouldn't work, right? The big bubble would suck that little one in, okay? But because surfactant is a detergent-like phospholipid, okay? Write that down. Surfactant is a detergent-like phospholipid that decreases the surface tension in the alveoli. Surfactant is a detergent-like, that means soapy, right? Detergent, soapy-like substance that it's a detergent-like phospholipid that decreases the surface tension in the alveoli, which allows them to collaterally ventilate via the pores of Cont and not collapse it. Because science says and physics said the larger sphere is going to suck up the smaller. But your creator made a trick for that. Okay? So instead of that, we're going to introduce a little surfactant in the lungs, which keeps that from happening. Now the big alveoli can communicate with the small alveoli, and both of them are just as happy as can be. It's not collapsing it at all. They communicate perfectly, okay, without collapsing this smaller alveoli, okay? Because each alveoli has what's called critical volume. That's the volume or pressure inside the alveoli to keep it open. Once the alveoli falls below critical volume, it collapses, all right? And the gas that holds the alveoli open at all times is not oxygen, but nitrogen, okay? And we'll learn that a little later when we get to oxygen therapy. I'm just trying to show you that the critical volume is like the arms, keeping it open. But when a larger alveoli comes, if there was no surfactant, it will go to critical volume and drop. Okay, it will fall below critical volume and collapse. But because you have surfactant, that does not happen unless you are deficient in surfactant. Okay, and our babies who are premature have a lack of surfactant. And so a lot of them, when they're born early, they can't breathe because their lungs cannot expand because they're too tight. They don't have surfactant. The surface tension is really, really high, and they can't breathe. So before they're born, you as the respiratory therapist will inject surfactant into the baby before he's born, right? Or right as they come out, all right?
When they come in, they say something about steroid shot. That's what they mean.
Not a steroid shot, Now, respiratory will be at the bedside of every high-risk birth. There will be a respiratory therapist there, ready to get the baby, make sure the baby is right, he's heated, he's oxygenating, he's breathing right. All those things is your job if you in neonates and peds, okay? And if that's what you like. But that's what you will be doing. And when you're there, you're going to be looking for these certain things, which you'll learn in 240, the APGAR score and all this kind of stuff. But the bottom line is you already know when the baby is born, how many weeks that he probably doesn't have surfactant. So we're going to already be prepared to do that when he comes. Okay, so he'll come, the baby will be intubated and injected with surfactant into his lungs, and it will be bagged into his little lungs until his lungs are able to finally ventilate. It's like a sponge, like a dry sponge. You know, if you leave a sponge out, it gets hard, it won't do anything, right? But if you wet it up, now it'll squeeze, right? Same thing happening to the baby's lungs. He's born too early, his lungs are like a dry sponge. You need to introduce surfactant in order to open them up. They can't, the surface tension is too tight and they won't open up, okay? And so that's why we do that to babies. But surfactant is there for that reason, okay? To reduce the surface tension, to allow collateral ventilation between two size alveoli, one big, one small. They can sit just like bubbles that you blew. One huge bubble and a little bitty bubble just sitting on top, floating without a problem, right? That's surfactant. All right. Alicia, did you have a question for me? Oh, okay.
No, sir, I just hit the wrong text box.
Okay. All right, let's keep on going. Then you have the type 3 cell, just 3 types. The type 3 alveolar cell are for eating and ingesting foreign material. That's it. They are pneumocystic macrophages. That's what macrophages are. Anytime you have macrophages in the cell, you have something that's eating foreign material. If there's a foreign material that makes it to the alveoli, which it shouldn't make it, but sometimes it does, because you have so many mechanisms of defense before it gets there, right? You got the nasal hairs, you have the mucosal, which we're going to learn about the different layers of the mucus that traps all that stuff before it gets to the alveoli. It should be pure gas in the alveoli, but sometimes things make it. And when it does, those little macrophages will engulf it and ingest it. Okay, that's what they're for. So type 1 cells are for gas diffusion. Type 2 are for producing surfactant. And type 3 are for pneumocystic macrophages or eating foreign materials. Now, another fact about, hold on one second, my daughter. Hello? Hold on one second. You had to go to the doctor. I'm sorry. Hold on one second. Okay, so one other fact about type 2 cells, about surfactant. Not only is it a detergent-like phospholipid that reduces surface tension, but it is continuously made or continuously produced, continuously metabolized, and continuously excreted. Okay, at all times, you are continually making surfactant all day, every day. It's continually produced, continuously metabolized, and continuously eliminated. All right, all day long. Because you may see some questions about surfactant. I'm going to ask you all these things are true about surfactant except stuff like that. Huh? Continuously produce, metabolize, and eliminate. Continuously produce, metabolize, and eliminate it. And we said that the type 3 cell is for ingesting foreign bodies. That's right here. Ingesting foreign bodies. All right, so let's look at it. Let's take a look at it. Where's the slide? All right. Alveolar cell. We already saw, I showed you yesterday about the little fishnet, analogy that I used. Those are the capillaries on top of the actual alveoli, right? And this is the deoxygenated blood passing by, or the capillary passing by the alveoli. The CO2 goes through the type 1 cell into the alveoli, right? And then oxygen diffuses through the type 1 cell into the capillary to make it oxygen rich, all right? That's the gas exchange that's happening, okay? Same thing going on right here. And then over here is a cross section, and I just want you to see the cells. So remember, we said type 1 cells make up what percentage of the alveoli? 95%. 95%. So look at it. That's it right here, the outer line. The outlining of the alveoli is the type 1 cell. Right? And that makes sense because the whole thing that the alveoli does is gas exchange. So we got to make sure that that one's the most one. I wouldn't want the macrophage to be the most one, right? And the gas diffusion be the least. That wouldn't make sense. And then here goes the Clara cell right here. This is a Clara cell, which is a type 2 cell, and it secretes surfactant. Secreting surfactant all day long to make sure the surface tension is on point. And then the type 3 cell is that alveolar macrophage that's just sitting there waiting to ingest foreign material. Okay. And this is the pulmonary capillary, like a cross section. You're looking down into it. Okay. It's not looking from the side. It's looking down into it and see how they're touching. This is less than 0.5 micrograms microns, less than 0.5 microns away from each other. So that's barely, pretty much damn near touching, okay? But they want to show you a little bit of space. This is interstitial fluid, of course, because in between the cells, right? Blood cells and any other cell. But then you have gas will leave here. CO2 will come out of this capillary and go into the alveoli. And oxygen will leave the alveolus and go into the capillary. That's what's happening over here. Okay, see how it's blue right here? And then when it starts mixing with that oxygen, it turns red. Just like the video I showed you yesterday. This is another picture of the alveoli as well, just a different type of picture, showing you that this is the surfactant, right? This is the surfactant layer that's going around the whole cell. Of course, the one on the outside is your type 1 cell, because that's responsible for the gas diffusion, so it makes sense to be the most one. Then you have your type 3 cell over here. Look at that little macrophage just sitting here waiting to eat anything that makes it into the alveoli. And this is your type 2 cell sitting there producing surfactant all day long. Okay? Now, the coronavirus. The coronavirus attacks your type 2 cells of the alveoli. We have found that that's how they do what they do. It attacks the type 2 cells of your alveoli. And if your type 2 cells are now not functioning right, then your lungs are not getting the surfactant that they should have. And that means the lungs are becoming more rigid. And so if they're rigid, you can't breathe because you're trying to take a breath and it's real short because the lungs are getting rigid, right? And then when we...
last night about the medical, they were talking about the COVID-19,
Okay.
where they were having like heart failure and all kinds of stuff going on.
Okay. And so as the lungs become more and more rigid, you can't breathe. You become more and more dyspneic or short of breath, right? Shortness of breath. That's what they do. And then they're also not oxygenating. Oxygen levels are dropping because they can't ventilate. Okay. Remember when I told you guys, I forgot which one I said, but one group, alpha and omega, one was my ventilation group, and one was I want you to make sure those are two different things. If somebody is, you don't necessarily fix ventilation with oxygenation. If somebody like can't breathe and all that, you don't have to just turn the oxygen up, right? That not necessarily mean that they're not oxygenating, okay? Ventilating and oxygenating are two separate things. Make sure you always remember that, okay? Ventilation is a CO2 issue, and oxygenation is an O2 issue. You can be not ventilating well, but have a great oxygen, okay? If somebody's not ventilating, that means they're not blowing off enough, what? CO2. You don't fix that with giving more oxygen, okay? You give that by giving more volume. Breathe for them. Give them some breaths so they can blow off more ventilation, more CO2. Okay, you fix ventilation with volume and rate. Either they're breathing too slow and you need to breathe, pick them up a little bit faster respiratory rate, or they're breathing real shallow like this. Right? If they're barely breathing, that CO2 starting to build because you should be breathing normal, right? And so to fix ventilation, or you fix the CO2 issue, okay? And if you fix that, then you'll fix it. But if somebody oxygen is low, then you give them oxygen, all right? If the oxygen, they're hypoxic, their oxygen level is 79, you don't give them more breaths, you give them some oxygen, okay? It's two different things. So please keep those separate as you learn and you master your respiratory therapy. Okay. Any questions on the alveoli? All right. Moving right along. All right, new share. Okay. Now, the lung in the thorax. This is going to talk about the actual thorax now, talking about the lungs, a little bit more in depth of the lung itself. We talked about the segments of the lungs, but now we're going to talk about the skin. What is the skin made of the lungs, right? Where is it located and stuff like that? What's protecting it? All right. So we're talking about the lung in the thorax now. The location of the lungs, guys, is in the thorax. And we said the thorax is the rib cage, inside of the rib cage. Okay, inside the rib cage is this is your thorax. Okay. This is Mr. Johnson's thorax. Okay, the lungs are in here, heart is in here, right? The thorax is protecting the heart and lungs and the great vessels of the body, okay, which is the aorta, pulmonary artery. Those are considered to be great vessels, okay? That's the thorax, okay? Now let's talk about the thorax. It surrounds the heart in the mediastinum. Make sure you underline that word mediastinum so you can look it up and make sure you understand what the mediastinum is. It might even be in the homework that I assigned tonight. It's more vocabulary. And speaking of vocabulary, make sure y'all don't just do these words and turn them in. Go over them when you're studying. Go over a few of them at a time because you need to know. I'm not saying every single word, but you may see a word and now, oh, I know what that means because as you go on, the terms are using more and more medical jargon and terminology, okay? So you need to know what these words mean. It's superior to the diaphragm. Superior, what does superior mean? Above. So the thorax sits above the diaphragm. And the diaphragm, I'll tell you now, is the major muscle of ventilation. The diaphragm is the #1 muscle of ventilation. All right. So on the diaphragm right quick. This right here, this little thin dome-shaped muscle. This dome-shaped muscle. This dome-shaped muscle here is considered to be the diaphragm. See that? That thin little muscle right there. That's all it is. It's considered to be the diaphragm. Okay? Hello? What? Okay, I'll call you back. I mean, what? Okay. Okay, I gotta go. All right. So that little bitty muscle is your major muscle of ventilation. Major muscle of ventilation is the diaphragm. So what's that mean? What did I say it was? It's superior. I mean, the thorax is superior. See, this is your lungs. The ribs will be covering this up, and it sits above the diaphragm. And that's the diaphragm there. The thorax sits right above it. Okay, it's superior to the diaphragm. All right. Now, what about the actual lung? It is surrounded by the pleura in the thorax. Now, you have two types of pleura. You have the parietal pleura, which is on the actual thorax, and you have the visceral pleura, which is actually on the lung. It's like a little film or lining, okay? If you think about ribs, if you cook out barbecue ribs, I always say Mr. McCarthy makes the best parietal ribs, okay? I make the best parietal ribs. You ever been eating ribs and when you bit off of it, on the bone itself, it's got this little clear plastic film on it? That's the pig's parietal pleura, okay? That's his parietal pleura, okay? That thin little waxy like, almost plastic like film. That's the lining of his thorax, okay? So inside the thorax, it has a lining. inside the thorax, there's a lining right there, right? That's that little smooth, clear lining on the inside of the actual thorax. That is the parietal pleura. Okay? So think about Mr. McCarthy's parietal ribs, because when you think about which pleural is which, you know the parietal one is the one that's on the ribs, on the thorax. Okay? Then the visceral pleura is the little skin or the little clear clear film that's actually on the organ itself, the lung itself. Okay? And that is called the visceral pleura. So have you ever cooked raw chicken? When you're about to cook it, on top of the muscle of the chicken, there's a little film right there. So on some pieces you can see it, some people don't even see it, but there's a film that's touching. That's the visceral pleura of the animal. Okay, so you got your lung inside of the thorax. Okay, you got your lung. This is a sample of a lung. Right, this is a sample of a lung. Okay, this is actually a left lung. Okay, and this will be the inside of the thorax. Okay, so this is his left lung inside of the thorax. Okay, now the lung itself has the visceral pleura, and the rib cage on the inside of the thorax has a parietal pleura, and in between the two is a small potential space. Okay, there's a potential space called the pleural space. Okay, it's just a little bit of space. It's like this. Just a little bit of space in between the ribs and the lungs, and they're separated by their pleura. The visceral pleura is the skin on top of the lung, and the parietal pleura is the skin on top of the thorax, on the inside of the thorax. And there's a small amount of fluid in between there, in that space, called serous fluid. There's a small amount of fluid between the two called serous fluid. Okay, so if we look right here, this is the cross section of the lung. And notice you have the outside, right? That outside is what's on actual ribs. That's the parietal pleura here. And the lining on the actual lung itself is the visceral pleura. And the space in between the two is called the what? Thank you. Pleural space. This is a better picture here. You got the parietal pleura, which is, this will be the film that's actually touching the ribs. And then the one that's touching the actual lung is the visceral pleura. And what's in between the two? Serous fluid. There's a small amount of serous fluid. Now, what do you think that fluid will be there for? What do you think serous fluid is even in there for? Yes, friction. To keep friction from heating up. Because when you breathe, your lungs and your ribs are doing different things, right? The diaphragm drops when you take a breath, okay? The diaphragm descends when you inspire. And when you descend, it sucks the lungs open, right? They don't just come out like that. They suck open like a vacuum. Think about if you put a balloon in your mouth backwards, okay? If you had a balloon, instead of blowing it that way, you put it in reverse in your mouth and sealed your lips and you sucked. What happens to the balloon while you're sucking? It's expanding, right? Because of a vacuum, right? That's what's going on in your lungs. It's called intrapulmonary pressure, okay? It's all about pressure. Breathing in and breathing out is simply a difference in pressure, okay? Write this down. And I think I might have told you this before, but air and liquid run away from pressure. Air and liquid run away from pressure. They scare their pressure. You know what I'm saying? Anybody you know that runs away from pressure, right? It goes from a pressure of high pressure to low pressure, okay? Air, which is volume or gas, let's just say gas and fluids, will follow the path of least resistance, right? It's going to run from high pressure to low pressure. So if they have some gas right here, and it's just say it's 100 millimeters of mercury pressure right here, and over here there's 20 millimeters of pressure, then that gas is going to go this way. Okay? It's going to follow the path of least resistance. Okay? So why I say that is because when your diaphragm descends, it sucks the lungs open like a vacuum. Okay? And when that's happening, the pressure inside of the lung becomes more negative than outside. Okay? So tell me this, which one is lower, -5 or 5? -5. Okay? So that's the lower number, right? -5. So if the pressure inside of the lungs, guys, becomes more negative than the ambient pressure, then air has no choice but to go in. Basic physics. That's why air goes into your nose, because there's a change in pressure because of that diaphragm. The diaphragm sits like a dome, and what it does is it flattens out, and that sucks those lungs down, and that makes the lungs expand. When that happens, the intrapulmonary pressure becomes more negative or lower than outside, which is ambient, right? Ambient means outside. And so it becomes lower than the outside air or pressure, and that makes air just go in, automatic. And to exhale, the diaphragm releases, and the lungs come back up because they're elastic, okay? They come back up, the pressure inside the lungs becomes higher than the pressure outside. So if the pressure in the lungs is higher than outside, where's gas going? Outside. It's going to follow the path of least resistance, going toward the lower pressure. So once my lungs become +5 and it's -5 outside, it's coming out. That is how ventilation works. Okay? It's all about a change in pressure, not because you force the air in or any of that. It's because there's just a change of pressure. That's why when you are at high altitudes, you go to Denver or go up Mount Everest, it's harder to breathe, right? They say, well, oxygen's thin up here. No, it's not thin. It's that the pressure outside is now lower than it was when you were down on the ground. And so now it takes a little more power to generate enough negative force to become more negative than outside and to make that air come on in. So now you got to work for this air a little bit harder because the barometric pressure is lower in higher altitudes, okay? And so we'll learn a little bit more of that as we go, but I want you to understand the mechanism of ventilation. The diaphragm descends, the lungs inflate, and the intrapulmonary pressure becomes more negative than the ambient pressure, which by nature, air has to go into the nose, okay? Automatic. And then when you exhale, your intrapulmonary pressure becomes higher or more positive than the ambient pressure, so air has to come out of the lungs, okay? That's how that works. And so between the two pleura, all this moving that you're doing, right? The inflating and deflate, inflate inside of the thorax, if you didn't have the serous fluid, you would have friction and they will become stuck to each other, which is a pleural effusion, okay? And when that happens, you got problems. So in between the space, there is a small amount of serous fluid, and that's why it's there. All right. It's 2:50. Let's take us a break. Let's take a break. Or it's let's just say 55. Come back at 3:05. Let's take a break. Come back at 3:05. We're going to continue on with the lung in the thorax. Pause the recording while we. All right. So now let's talk about the upper lung. The upper lung is called the apices. The apices of the lung is the upper portion of the lung. That's this little part right here. The tip is called the apices. And to get a good understanding of where at in the thorax the lungs are, is telling you that the apices extend about 1 to 2 inches above the clavicle. Okay, so this one's, you can't really do it on the skeleton that we have, but his clavicle, your clavicle, right, about 1 to 2 inches above the clavicle is how high the apices of the lungs extend. Okay, they're letting you know that about 1 to 2 inches above this clavicle is where the lung is, of course, posterior, but as that's about how high the lungs go. Okay, about 1 to 2 inches above the clavicle. Okay. Then it has a space on the lungs called the root or the hilum. The root or the hilum is the place where everything goes in and out of the lungs. See this little section here? This is called the root, also known as the hilum. Nothing goes in and out of the lungs unless it goes in through the root or the hilum of the lungs. It's one on both sides, both lungs. This is just happen to be one lobe or one lung, but the root or the hilum, that's where the pulmonary artery goes. See your pulmonary artery, you got your pulmonary veins come back in through there. And I'm gonna show you a picture on the PowerPoint that's a little bit better. But that is the attachment of the main stem bronchus and the artery. So your left and right main stem bronchus go in, your pulmonary artery goes in, your pulmonary veins come out of the lungs, all of that right there at the hilum. Okay, right at the hilum. And that's this right here. This is the hilum. Can y'all see it? Okay. This is the hilum. Notice you have your, let me do the slideshow from the current slide. All right, so notice you have your pulmonary artery. See how it's blue or purplish color? Because it's deoxygenated blood. The pulmonary artery, because arteries take blood, what? No, arteries. I'm saying arteries do what? Take blood away from the heart. So blood, if the heart is sitting here in the middle, it's going away from the heart into the lungs on both sides. The left and right main stem bronchus go in and out of the lungs at the hilum. And the pulmonary veins, right? Veins take blood to the heart. And so they're coming from the lungs back to the heart. See, that's why it's pointing this way via the pulmonary veins. Okay. This is whole little area here is called the hilum. Okay, and it's fastened together at the pulmonary ligament. It's like a ligament called the pulmonary ligament, kind of fastens it all in place. Okay, that's the hilum. All right. Then we start talking about the bone, the bones in the thorax, the bony thorax. Check, switch back and forth faster than that. All right. Now let's talk about before we talk about the bony thorax. Let me go and knock out the base of the lungs. The base of the lungs. See the shape? This shape is called concave. So the apices are pointed at the top, and it extends 1 to 2 inches above the clavicle, and the root or the hilum is in the middle. That's where everything goes in and out of the lungs. Okay, at the hilum, right? And then the bottom is called concave shape, curved like that because of the diaphragm. Remember I told you that the diaphragm sits right inferior to the thorax or the lungs, right? And just kind of curves there and fits in just like that. So when it flattens, it sucks the lung open. And then when you exhale, it releases. Right, goes back up into its curvature shape, and the lungs elasticity makes the lungs contract, and you exhale. Okay. Now, the right side or the right lung's concave structure is higher than the left due to the liver. Okay. The right side sits up a little higher than the left one does because of the liver. Okay. Again, this picture here kind of shows you a little bit of what I'm talking about. This is the diaphragm, right? This little muscle here. And we're talking about the concaveness of the lung. See how the lung fits that curve? Because of the diaphragm, okay? All right, now, your liver is right here. So the right side is up just a little bit more than the left side because of the liver. The liver sits right there, okay? Your liver is on your right side. If you're having right-sided stomach pain, it's not your stomach, it's your liver area, okay? Your liver is on your right. So that's why the right lung is a little bit higher than the left because of the liver, all right? That's the aspects of the lung. Now, the bony thorax. The bony thorax. The thorax is that rib cage we talked about. It surrounds and protects the lungs. It aids in ventilation. It surrounds and protects the lungs and aids in ventilation. You're going to wonder, well, how does it aid in ventilation? How does it make you breathe? Because the thorax expands and contracts. When it expands, it allows for the lungs to fill up, right? When the diaphragm descends and the lungs start to fill up, if the ribs didn't move, you wouldn't be able to take a deep breath. The ribs have to see how they expand. The ribs expand and they increase the anterior to posterior diameter. Okay, the ribs have to expand to allow for the lungs to fill up. Okay, so that's how they aid in ventilation. Okay, there are three important parts of the thorax, the bony thorax. You have the sternum. First part we're going to talk about is the sternum. The sternum. Who can tell me what the sternum is? Huh? Right in the middle, that hard bone that's right in the middle of your chest. This is your sternum. This is your sternum. Okay? And the sternum is made up of three parts. Three parts. You have the top part, which is called the manubrium. This is the manubrium. This is called the body. And this little bullet shape down here is called the xiphoid process. Three parts of the sternum. You have the manubrium, the body, and the xiphoid process. That's the three parts of the sternum. Okay? Let's see what else they tell us. Now, the notch above the manubrium, this notch in here, because you can feel this. You know, you got two clavicles and then you got your sternum. So feel that on your own neck. That little divot right there, that's between your clavicles, right above the manubrium. That's called the suprasternal notch. Very simple. Supra means above, sternal notch. A little notch right there. Now, what's significant about the suprasternal notch is if you push back, what you can feel is your trachea. That's your trachea. Right behind the suprasternal notch is your trachea. Okay, that's what's significant about the suprasternal notch. Behind, what can you palpate behind the suprasternal notch? That answer would be what? The trachea. That's your trachea back there. These some landmarks we're going to learn about because you can't stick your finger through this sternum, but if you could, there's some things that would say, okay, if you could, this would be this. If you could, this would be that, right? So that's what we're going to talk about. So suprasternal notch is the trachea is palpable behind it. Palpable means you can feel it, all right? Palpable. Now, then you have, and I made this little mark right here so you can see it, these little black marks. This black mark here, the first one between the manubrium and the, what's this part? This whole thing is the sternum. Yeah, so the manubrium and the body, right? The whole thing is the sternum. It's three parts: manubrium, body, xiphoid process. So the little notch between, or not a notch, the little divot, there's a little line right here, barely can see it. But the little separation between the manubrium and the body is called the angle of Lewis. Right there. Okay? The little, it's not a space, it's like a little divot, like a little upside down speed bump. Okay? Like it's real small. But between the manubrium and the body, there's a little indentation here, and that's called the angle of Lewis. Somebody named Lewis probably found it. Okay? Nothing special about the name. But the specialness about what it is if I could stick my finger through there, what do you think I could feel? The carina. Okay? Palpate behind this. If I could stick my finger through the angle of Lewis, I would touch my carina. And what is the carina? Where the right and left main stem bronchus bifurcate. Okay? Where the right and left main stem bronchus bifurcate, that's called the carina. And the angle of Lewis is the place at which if I stuck my finger through the angle of Lewis, I would be touching the carina. Okay? All right. Then the xiphoid process is just a little tail piece down here. But you must be careful because that's why hand placement on CPR is very important. Because if I break that, it becomes a projectile in the body. And you can push it right into the heart or the lungs. Okay? So that's why hand placement, correct CPR hand placement is very important. We'll be monitoring, checking you out on correct hand placement. All right? It's going to also talk about the ribs. You got true ribs, false ribs, and all of that. All right. Okay. So yeah, the point at bifurcation of the right and left main stem bronchus will be the carina. You can feel that. You can feel it right behind the angle of Lewis. What can I feel behind the suprasternal notch? The trachea. Okay, so you got the silk. I got the trachea, then down just a little bit, right, is my bifurcation. So you see, it's not that they don't bifurcate way down here, right? It's way up here where it bifurcates, okay, because it's got a lot of other branches to get to, all right? And so as far as the ribs are concerned, you have true ribs, which are the ribs 1 through 7, and they are connected directly to the sternum. 1 through 7 are connected directly to the sternum. Okay, 1 through 7 are your true ribs. They're connected directly to the sternum. And then we have what's called false ribs. And the false ribs are pair 8 through 10, and they connect to the sternum indirectly via the costal cartilage. So 8 through 10, they connect indirectly to the sternum through the costal cartilage. Costal means rib, right? Costal cartilage. See, this is not bone right here. This is cartilage. Okay. Then you have floating ribs, which are pair 11 and 12. They have no attachment to the sternum or other ribs. They're just kind of floating there. Also called false ribs. Some people still call them false ribs as well. Okay. So it just depends. Some people say false ribs are 8 through 10. Some people say 8 through 12. Okay. Either one. All right, so let's see, who was that one? Kelsey. Kelsey, tell me what is all included in the mediastinum.
It
With,
contains the heart, great
yep.
vessels, trachea, esophagus, thymus gland, lymphatic structures, and nerves.
Good. You must know this mediastinum. You're going to have questions about mediastinum. All these are included except which one? A mediastinum, that's this middle section of the thorax, right? Contains, that's the area. The mediastinum is an area, okay? Which is the middle of the thorax that contains the heart, the great vessels, the trachea, the esophagus, thymus gland, lymphatic structures, and nerves. All those things will be considered to be inside the mediastinum. Mediastinum. All right. What else we have there? Brain, alveolar fluid, muscle ventilation, circulation. All right. So now we have talked about the upper airway. We talked about the lower airway. We've gotten into a lot of different information. I'm not finished, but I'm just kind of going a little quick review. Upper airway, lower airway, and what they are consisted of. Okay, what they are consisted of. Let me see if what's ever on this here so for a better picture. The bony thorax. We can kind of go over this one. Here it is right here, a little closer to you to be able to see it. Your manubrium is here. This is your sternum. The whole thing is your sternum. You have your manubrium, you have your body, and you have the xiphoid process. Shows you the true ribs and the false ribs. Okay. Then you have another picture here that kind of showed you that angle of Lewis a little bit better. Notice how it's just a little small little divot, right? It's all it is, a little indentation there. This is the manubrium. This is the body, and this is the xiphoid process. It's just half of it. They got a half of a picture. But this is the angle of Lewis here. If I was to push through that angle of Lewis, that would be my carina, right? I will be able to feel my carina, where my left and right main stem bronchus bifurcate, right? Then the mediastinum is considered to be this area here, all of this area. So this is the vertebrae. Okay, this is the vertebrae. So if that's the vertebrae, then Courtney, tell me what is this right here, Courtney? What would this be, Courtney?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Jessica. What would this be, Jessica?
I'm not sure.
All right. Talicia, do you know what this would be? Think about it, guys. This is a side view, and this is the vertebrae. If this is the vertebrae from the side, then what would this be, Talicia? What bone is this?
Is it the bony thorax?
The whole thing is the bony thorax. This is the sternum here. Guys, this is the sternum right here. This will be the sternum. This is the vertebrae or your backbone. So what would this be? Anybody?
You say it's the angle. What kind of angle? Side.
Yeah, this is a side view, the lateral view. What bone would this be?
Clavicle.
Clavicle. This is the clavicle. This is a side view. This will be your clavicle bone. This is your spine, and this is your sternal area. Okay, I'm showing you that because this is a side view into your bony thorax. This whole area here is your mediastinum. Okay, you got the anterior mediastinum, the middle mediastinum, and the posterior, and then the superior mediastinum. It's just showing you the mediastinum. All of those things we just talked about are located inside the mediastinum. Now, Brittany, what is this? What is this, Brittany? I can't hear you. Diaphragm. That's the diaphragm, the dome-shaped muscle under the thorax. That is the diaphragm. It's going to contract or flatten, right? Once it flattens, it's going to suck the lungs open, okay? So it's a domino effect, right? The diaphragm descends, the lungs fill up, interpulmonary pressure becomes more negative than outside, and air has to do what? Huh? Come in. I said, let me listen to it again. I said the diaphragm descends. Yeah, descend, it flattens. The lungs open up, okay? And the intrapulmonary pressure becomes lower or more negative than outside. And so then that way air has to do what? Go in, because it's traveling to the area of least resistance. Okay? All right. Now we're going to talk about the sputum production, this mucus we talked about. What produces this mucus? Take a look at that in your note-taking guide and fill out this information for a second. Right here, this mucus information right here. Fill this out for me right quick. Start with submucosal glands, and then we'll get back to that in a second. Give you a chance to write that down. Hello. Submucosal glands are one of the things that produce mucus, okay? Mucus, oh, there we go. I didn't get that part. Mucus, this is the next lesson in what we're doing. Mucus production. Now, all of that stuff you see people cough up and all of that, you wonder what is that about? You can't log, can you log into the Zoom, Zoom on your phone? Oh, you was logged in? Oh, okay. All right. So mucus production and movement. Production of what makes the mucus, right? Because mucus is very, very important. Too much of it can kill you. Not enough of it can be detrimental. But the number one thing that makes mucus are your goblet cells. Goblet cells. Goblet cells are located in the surface of the tracheobronchial tree, and they secrete mucus, okay? The goblet cells is one of, I didn't say the only place, but one of the places where you get most of your mucus production. It makes gobs and gobs and gobs of mucus. That's why I say goblet cells, to help you remember. It makes gobs and gobs and gobs of mucus. In your book, page 194 talks about the mucus and the different layers of the mucus. You can have a picture on page 193 of the mucus or the goblet cells and the submucosal bronchial glands. Submucosal glands and bronchial glands are pretty much synonymous. So if you see a question that says bronchial glands instead of submucosal gland, that's okay. Okay. But submucosal glands, goblet cells, and bronchial glands, those are the things that make the most mucus. That's where it comes from. Okay. That's where it comes from. All right. Yep. So it's going to tell you the mixture and all that in the book. So you make sure you're reading that key page there for sure. So goblet cells is number one. Number two, submucosal glands, also known as bronchial glands. I'll put that beside it. Bronchial glands. They are below the lamina propria, which is another section, right? The lamina propria, where your nerves and nerve fibers and stuff are located, okay? And they secrete mucus and bronchial secretions. So the submucosal glands secrete mucus and other bronchial secretions, okay? Sounds nasty, but it is what it is. Now, what is it that it is producing? Well, mucus. Mucus. And how is mucus composed of? 95% what? Water. Mucus is 95% water. 95% water and 2% glycoproteins and 1% carbohydrate. And then the rest is trace amounts of lipid, which is fat, right? Debris, stuff that was in your mouth, that Ritz cracker from last night that you ate, that you didn't brush your teeth good this morning. DNA, your DNA is in your mucus. And other foreign bodies, no telling what that is. But so if the police wanted your DNA, they get you sick. They got you. Okay, they got you. Stay humble, don't spit. All right. How much mucus do we make? We make 100 to 150 milliliters of mucus a day. 100 to 150 ml. This bottle of water is 500 ml. So half of this, a little bit less than half of this, every day of mucus, not the spit. I'm talking about real deal hot mucus, right? That's how much you make a day. The body's constantly producing. And who produces it? Who produces it? Goblet cells and bronchial glands and submucosal glands, pretty much the same thing. They secrete constantly 100 to 150 milliliters of mucus a day, okay? It has 95% water, 2% glycoprotein, 1% carbs. You don't have to remember all of the composition, but you will need to know it's 95% water. Okay, and I'll ask you how many carbohydrates are in mucus, okay? But it does have traces of fat, debris, DNA, and foreign bodies. And it is there to make up what we call the most fabulous, amazing system in the body, which is the mucus blanket. Simple, but you never thought how intricate it is. The mucus blanket. Your trachea and your tracheobronchial tree is saturated with mucus. Okay? If you were to slice open somebody's trachea, it's going to be full, not full of mucus at this point, like it's blockage, but the layer, the wall of it is pure mucus. Okay? The wall of it is like pure mucus. Now, mucus doesn't get nasty till it gets to your mouth, okay? Or gets to your trachea area that's open, okay? inside of your tracheobronchial tree. It doesn't have to be, it's not nasty at all unless it's infected. Okay, it can be infected with Pseudomonas, which has its own smell. You walk in the room, he got Pseudomonas. Thick, yellow, nasty secretions that come out, and you can smell them from the door. Okay, they're very nasty. He could have staph. They could have Acinetobacter. All that can be in the sputum. Okay, you're going to learn more about your gram-negative and gram-positive diseases or bacteria when you get to 220. Okay, that's when we're going to start talking about those germs. Okay, but the mucus blanket is a continuous blanket of mucus over the tracheobronchial tree. Now, not the outside, but the inside of the tracheobronchial tree. Okay, and it's there for a specific reason. Not pause, but I'm going to this for a minute. A specific reason. The mucus blanket. You just coughed up a little bit yourself. Swallow. This thing right here was made in 1979. Still got it. Hey, I remind you. Let's go. All right. So let's make this. See the layers. All right. The mucus blanket. So we're gonna say this is a cross section laying down, okay? A cross section. This is the actual epithelium, right? Of your, let's just say your tracheobronchial tree. Inside, right? You're looking on a cross section. Okay. Of course, you have your goblet cells. Okay. These are my goblet cells. Right? And then I have these other things down here called submucosal glands. Come all the way down here. Okay? That's that part. This is my submucosal glands. Okay? And so I'm looking at them. Of course, we got my what are these? Cilia. All right, so this is my cilia. All right. All right. So my mucus is on the orange. So we have my mucus, right? And as it comes out, it pours out, it forms a little blanket, right? And so this is my mucus blanket here. It's a blanket of thick mucus going across. This is my mucus. This is my mucus blanket. Now, this mucus blanket is made up of 2 layers. Okay? This first layer is called the sole layer, S-O-L. The sole layer. So this is my soul layer. And this is my what? Gel layer. Can y'all see that on the screen good? That better? Okay, okay. All right, guys, so you might not see the orange that good, but this is orange right here. This layer here. This is the soul layer closest to the actual tissue, okay? And then above the soul layer is one little thin layer called the gel layer. That's the purple one. Okay, the purple one would be the gel layer. A little darker there. Okay. This is the gel layer. And then the orange one, I'll make the orange one. Is that my orange one? Way over there. And this is my soul layer. No wonder it's over there. It don't work. I'm supposed to get some more. See that better? I'm not an artist. That's what I'm. Now, you see that better on the screen? Okay. So you have your soul layer and your gel layer made by which is the whole thing, is the mucus blanket. Okay, both of them together is the mucus blanket. Has two layers. Soul layer, which is right by the cilia, and the gel layer is at the top. Okay, gel layer is at the top. And the function, they have their own function. Well, the soul layer is pretty much just the liquidy, more liquidy, okay? It's just pretty much the liquidy part of the mucus blanket. But the gel layer's number one job is to do what? What you think? No, let me also do one more thing. One more thing. Air. This is a cross section, right? This is inside of your trachea tree, right? If I was looking inside, as you breathe, air is going across. Okay, so as you breathe, air is going across your mucus blanket. So what do you think the gel layer's job is to do?
Is it trapping all the like bacteria and foreign particles?
So you walking around some sawdust or working at some factory that's got a lot of little particles that get past your mask, whatever. The gel layer's job is to trap foreign material from the air. Okay? The gel layer will trap foreign material from the air. So that dust or whatever, dust mites, the whatever, right? Whatever is in the air. Smoke. Have you ever been around smoke or something, or some guys work at a factory and you blew your nose and it was little pieces in the where, depending on if you worked at a factory or something, your nose caught that, right? And the mucus caught it. The mucus and the hairs in your nose caught it. But if it made it past that, it got trapped on the mucus blanket, right? Cigarette smoke has a lot of foreign particles and chemicals in it that get trapped. Tar from cigarette smoke gets trapped on the mucus blanket, on the gel layer. That's what it's for, okay? So the soul layer is pretty much just the more liquidy part of the mucus blanket, and the gel layer is there to capture any foreign particles that make it past the nose, okay? Now, the cilia are there to move this mucus blanket. It moves it in one direction, and it becomes the mucociliary escalator. And why it's escalator? Because you're not laying flat, you're standing up, right? And so it goes up. That's why it's called an escalator. This mucus blanket will be standing up. All right, this is a cross section in your tracheobronchial tree. And as you breathe in and out, the air or the particles that get trapped or get past your nose get trapped on the gel layer. And what's happening is these cilia beat in one direction. They don't go back and forth. They beat like seaweed in one direction, pushing the mucus blanket up the mucociliary escalator to your mouth so that you can cough it up. Okay. Once it gets to the trachea area, you feel it. You start coughing up and you cough that stuff out. Right. That's the job. It's working all day long. Okay. The cilia beat and move this whole mucus blanket up the tracheobronchial tree so you can cough up the secretions and all of the junk. Okay. The mucus is made by the submucosal glands and the goblet cells. They continuously produce mucus all day long. How much do they make? 100 to 150 mLs every day. Okay? They making that up every single day in order to help clear the airway from foreign material. It's called bronchial hygiene. That's your body's natural bronchial hygiene. Okay, your body's natural bronchial hygiene mechanism is the mucus blanket, which is part of the mucociliary escalator. I want to say excavator so bad because my son sings it all day long from Lippy. You know about Lippy? He loves he loves the excavator song. All right. All right, so that's what's happening, guys. That's very, very important, very intricate way that it works. It's in your book, and it's also in the PowerPoint that I'm going to continue to show you. Let my mouse back up. All right, so take a look. Goblet cell. All those I showed you up there, you know, the natural, tissue that are columnar epithelial cells. And you have a few of them every now and then would be a goblet cell that has gobs of mucus here, and it spits out on top and becomes a blanket. All right, this is what I just showed you on the board. Right, this one down here is a little bit better at the bottom, but it shows you. See the mucus and how the mucus have these little particles in it, right? That's the mucus blanket, right? Then you have these goblet cells here. Then you have the lamina propria, which is this whole little pink area. This is the lamina propria, which holds different types of cells, and the nerves and stuff like that will be in the lamina propria. And then down here, you have the glands, these submucosal. See, sub at the bottom, these submucosal glands will be at the bottom. They also produce mucus. And then, of course, your cartilage here, which would be one of those C-shaped rings, right? One of those C-shaped rings will be these cartilage right here, all right? And so you have your mucus, and that's the mucus blanket. The next one will show a little bit better. See this? This is even better. Those tall epithelial, columnar epithelial cells have cilia on the top of them. See those cilia? Hair-like projections that propel mucus forward. That's what they do. They are hair-like projections that push the mucus blanket forward or up the escalator, okay? And these pieces here are the foreign material, right? And it's showing you the movement of the mucus to the pharynx. That's where it's on its way to, so you can cough it up. You have your goblet cells, look a little different on this one, right? But they're nice, big old little fat cells that produce gobs and gobs of mucus. This over here is an actual picture of cilia, magnified at a very high magnification. He's showing you from here in his What is this? What structure is this right here? This is the left what? Left main stem bronchus. There you go. Bronchus. That's important. If they were you talking about both of them, we would say bronchus. Okay. But this is the left main stem bronchus. Notice how it curves off real hard. You know, when left has a more acute angle curve, right? And then it breaks off. So this is the if this is the left main stem bronchus, then these would be the what? No, not yet. Bronchi, right? Bronchi. And this is his left. So what he has one going, this one is like going up into the left upper lobe. And then these go down and would go down into his left lower lobe, right? These will go down to his left lower lobe. But anyway, this is not anatomically 100%. They're just trying to show you for the effect of the cilia, okay? But this is the primary bronchus, right? And then it's showing you a cross section right here. So right here on the lining, this is what I'm just showing you on the board. This lining here on the inside is what I just showed you. That's what this is over here. And it has little bitty cilia, little hairs, right? They line the primary bronchus to remove microbes and debris from the interior of the lung. And look at these little fat things here. These are goblet cells. These are little goblet cells that continue to make the mucus so it can do its thing. All right. Now, as we spoke about earlier, this is the what? This is the diaphragm. What is the major job of the diaphragm? The major muscle of ventilation. The diaphragm is your major muscle of ventilation because you have major muscles and then you're going to have what's called accessory muscles. Okay. We got the major muscles and then we have accessory muscles. Okay. Accessory muscles are when you know somebody's working hard, right? If you see somebody doing this, you ever seen anybody doing this at the grocery store on the cart? They always want to do this. They want the cart, right? They don't. Nobody else. Kids can't push the cart when this person comes. He got to have the cart. This is called tripoding. This is another form of accessory muscle use. Usually my COPD or emphysema smoker, long life smoker, would be like this on the actual shopping cart. And they're walking around like this all the time because what that does is help allow the pectoralis muscles to help in respiration. Okay. And then you have some people same people when they wash dishes. They wash dishes like this. Why? They got their elbows on the sink when they're washing dishes, stuff like that. You can notice that. As a respiratory therapist, when you walk in a room and you got a patient on the bedside table like this watching TV, he's probably using his accessory muscles. That's what you got to notice. Okay. Oh, he's tripoding. Okay. That's one thing that you're going to learn. We have other accessory muscles. When you see this muscle, somebody using those sternocleidoid mastoid muscle and the scalene muscles, those are accessories. But the major muscle of ventilation is the what? Diaphragm. Okay, the diaphragm. So let's talk about it. I want to go ahead of myself. So the mucus blanket, we said, is the continuous blanket of mucus over the tracheobronchial tree. It has two layers. The sole layer, which is near the tissue, and it's more the liquid. Okay. And then the gel layer is near the air. That's the layer that's right by the air because it's going to pick up the foreign material, and it's more thick. It's thick and sticky, okay? Thick and sticky. So when stuff goes across it, it catches it, okay? Somebody sent me a chat. Okay, Talisha. All right. The cilia, we said, are hair-like projections that extend up into the sole layer. They don't go into the gel layer. They just extend up into the sole layer and beat, right? Okay, and that is part of our mucociliary escalator, right? The things that form it is the mucus blanket and the cilia. That's it. The mucus blanket and the cilia together make up the mucociliary escalator. The cilia move in a wave-like motion. How much does it push it up the tract? How far does the cilia push it up the tract? What's the rate at which it moves it? 2 centimeters what? Per minute. 2 centimeters per minute, the mucociliary escalator is being propelled toward the pharynx at 2 centimeters per minute. But if you are a smoker, the cilia are paralyzed. Cigarette smoke paralyzes the cilia. So that means the mucus blanket is not moving, right? The mucus blanket is not moving at all. All right. And so that's why you have what's called the smoker's cough, because they smoke all day and the cilia don't move. So that mucus blanket just traps foreign material. It's just loaded up, right? More and more junk all day long, and it doesn't move. But then when they fall asleep, they say, hey, wake up, let's go. Let's get this out of here before he wake up, right? And so then it starts to move with 2 cc's per minute over your nighttime sleep. You will sleep about 8 hours. So God knows how many minutes that is, right? 8 hours is how many minutes? So 8 hours is what, 480 minutes? 480 minutes, right? And so that's how many hours? No, I'm saying 8 hours is 480 minutes. So 480 times 2 is what? 480 times 2. Let's see, 480 probably. So 480 times 2, yeah, 960 centimeters, right? And so 960 centimeters divided by 2.54 is 377 inches, right? That's how much is done moved. It's just constantly moving. So you best believe when you wake up, you got a pharynx full of junk. All right, that's why they cough when they first wake up. That's why they cough, and they cough about 5 minutes straight until they finally are able to clear that stuff up. And then they go back to smoking cigarettes and pause it all over again. Okay, so they're, huh?
Is that what also too? Because like a couple of years ago, I used to smoke and I used to bartend, and I would always wake up and I'd be super thirsty when I woke up. I wouldn't cough, but I'd be really thirsty.
That might have been, you might have been breathing through your mouth when you slept while you were smoking, maybe because of your ventilation issues. It's probably because you were sleeping with your mouth open. All right. Because your nose has to humidify that air. And if you're not breathing through your nose, breathing through your mouth, now your mouth is trying to humidify that air and it doesn't do the job that the nose can do. So you wake up with a really dry mouth. Right? And it could have been some medicine you were taking or anything.
Yeah, my brother, one of my oldest brothers, he smokes every single day. And
Oh.
Wake up every morning, cough, all that stuff.
Yep.
It's one of the reasons I quit. He was like, you don't quit, you're going to start
Just
doing
like
that.
that. Yeah. Well, smokers is job stability. It's job stability for you. Because as a respiratory therapist, that's when you're going, your number one patient is a COPDer who smokes. So I don't want everybody to smoke, but if you smoke, hey, that keeps me getting paid. Okay? All right. So the sputum. What is the sputum made up of? Mucus, saliva, and nasal secretions, right? So the mucus mixes with the saliva in your mouth and the snot in your nose. All that together is your sputum. You mobilize it and get rid of it by coughing. Okay? All right. We talked about alveolar fluid already, right? We talked about what the alveolar fluid is. What is it? I mean, what is it called? What is alveolar fluid? Surfactant. Surfactant is the fluid inside the alveoli. It's not like full. It's just like the wetness of the alveoli is surfactant. It is a detergent-like phospholipid that does what? Decreases surface tension and prevents alveolar collapse. And I showed you why, because we already talked about When you have a larger sphere and a smaller sphere, it's going to suck the smaller one in because of surface tension. But because of the creation of surfactant, now both the large one and the small one both have the same surface tension. So they can touch each other, and the big one does not suck it in or collapse it. And they are able to communicate via the pores of Cont in a process called communication between alveoli through the pores of Cont is called anybody online know?
Collateral ventilation.
There you go. Collateral ventilation. You don't have to wait on me to ask. Whatever I say, guys, anybody online can chime in, okay? Collateral ventilation. Okay? That's important. Now, surfactant is also continuously produced, continuously secreted, and continuously eliminated. Those are 4 facts about surfactant. You will have a question and say, surfactant does what? All of these except, right? And so you got to know which one to get rid of. Detergent like phospholipid decreases surface tension, prevents alveolar collapse, and is continuously produced, secreted, and eliminated. All right. Now, let's take another break, and we'll come back and talk about the muscles of ventilation. I'm going to talk about the muscles of ventilation, then I'm going to knock off for today, okay? Which is, matter of fact, let's go ahead and knock out these muscles, and then we'll be done, because the next thing will be types of breathing and breath sounds and all that. I'll start that on Monday, okay? We'll knock out types of breathing, because look what's left. Types of breathing, the regulation of the breathing center, where all this stuff in the brain happens to make you breathe, right? And then that's it on this. And then I got another sheet that talks about breath sounds. We want to talk about breath sounds, and that page in the book in chapter 16 I told you to read at the beginning of the day, that talks about breath sounds, okay? That's going to be it, all right? After that, then we'll kind of review a little bit, and then we're going to maybe do a few of the oral questions, and then we're going to be done. The test will be Wednesday, right? Wednesday. No, well, Tuesday, Monday, we're out of school. Yeah, the last little bit, too, that's what I mean. I'm sorry. The last little bit we'll knock out on Tuesday, and then Wednesday is the exam, okay? Now, don't forget, do I have a lab? Is it hand washing lab on that? Okay, yeah. So you're going to come in. That's going to be simple. Now, let me tell you this, too. I'm glad we talked about that. For the hand washing lab, it's so fast and so simple. And the test is only 30 minutes. You only have like, it was 25 questions on this test. So I'm going to give y'all like 38 minutes to take this test. So alpha group come in at 1 o'clock. You take your, and the omega group, you can come on in at 2 o'clock, okay? Because by the time you get here, they'll be done with the test and wash their hands right quick and go home. That's simple. Just watching you wash your hands, not touching the sink and not touching all of that, right? And then you use the paper towel, dry your hands, another paper towel to cut the water off, right? And throw it away. It's a simple washing, hand washing. So it doesn't take that long. So instead of me waiting to, unless you can't, if you can't come till 4 in your omega group, I already took off my job at 4 and I can't come early, that's fine. I'll be here, okay? But if you want to come on, if the omega group can come on in at 2, alpha group come at 1 like usual, they're going to come in, knock out the test, wash their hands, and go home, okay? And then the omega group, instead of waiting from 2 to 4, you can come on in at 2 if you want. I can knock out the ones that want to come. And if you cannot come until 4, then that's fine. Come on in at 4 so you can take your test and wash your hands and go home, okay? So that's how we're going to do that on Wednesday, all right? So let's look at these muscles right quick and we'll be done. Bless you. Muscles of ventilation. The major muscle of ventilation is the diaphragm. The diaphragm separates the thorax and the abdomen, right? You got your abdominal cavity, you have your thorax, but in between is the diaphragm. It is a muscular it's a muscular hemidiaphragm. It's kind of dome shaped, okay? Normally dome shaped. We already said that the right side is higher than the left due to the liver. Now, what happens? the diaphragm will flatten on inspiration. Okay, it drops, it flattens on inspiration, and it is triggered by the phrenic nerve. Make sure you highlight that. The diaphragm is triggered or innervated. You might see the word called innervated or stimulated by the phrenic nerve, P-H-R-E-N-I-C. That nerve goes from your diaphragm up to your brain. When your brain decides to breathe, it sends a signal down the phrenic nerve to the diaphragm, and the diaphragm will flatten or contract. It is the major muscle of ventilation. Like we said, I can't say that enough. Now, how much does it drop? Well, the normal diaphragmatic excursion, and all that's a fancy way of saying the normal amount of flattening that the diaphragm does is 1.5 centimeters during quiet breathing. Quiet breathing means normal breathing, because when we get to mechanics, we're going to talk about quiet breathing and forceful breathing, right? Quiet breathing and forceful breathing. But quiet breathing, like you're doing right now, just sitting here breathing normal, your diaphragm is descending, right? 1.5 centimeters with every breath. It descends and lets go. Descends, lets go. Okay? Exhalation is passive. All you got to do is let go because of the elasticity of your lungs. So because our lungs are elastic, all you got to do is let go and you exhale, right? And so it goes down 1.5 centimeters during quiet breathing, goes down, right? And then back up, down, back up. That's your breathing. Now, what if you're labored? What if you just got through running a marathon, or you are scared, or working out, or whatever you're doing that's got you labored breathing? The diaphragm can go up to 10 centimeters during labored ventilation. So it may increase to 6 to 10 centimeters during labored breathing. So if a question talks about the diaphragm, it says, how much can the diaphragm flatten? Up to what? You know, the answer will be up to 6 to 10 centimeters, right? It normally just does 1.5. That's it. That's not even a lot. 1.5 centimeters? That's just a little bit. That's enough to fill them lungs up for what you need for ventilation, right? Unless your ventilation needs become different. Your CO2 building up for whatever reason. Your alveolar type 1 cells are dysfunctioning. Your CO2 is building up. Now your body's saying, hey, I need to get some more of this out. That diaphragm will start flattening more so the lungs can fill up. But for normal, quiet breathing, it will drop only 1.5 centimeters and has the potential to flatten 6 to 10 centimeters if need be during labored ventilation. That is the diaphragm. Okay, it stands alone. The major muscle of ventilation is the diaphragm. Now it has a little help as well, and that is the intercostal muscles. Your intercostal muscles are the muscles where? Where would the intercostal muscles be? In between the ribs. The little muscles in between those ribs, in between the skeletal ribs, you have muscles there. You got intercostal muscles there. Now you got two types of intercostal muscles, and this is a tricky one, okay? This is a kind of tricky one. You have internal intercostal muscles, and we have external intercostal muscles. We have internal intercostal muscles, and we have external intercostal muscles. Now, this is the tricky part. The internal intercostal muscles help with exhalation, and the external intercostal muscles help with inhalation. See how it's reversed? Okay. The internal intercostal muscles, guys, help you with exhalation, and the external intercostal muscles help us with inspiration. All right? How does it do that? It does that by this. The external contraction pulls the ribs up, right? external contraction will pull the rib, it pulls them up and out, okay? The external intercostal muscles, when they contract, they pull the ribs up and out. They do this so that they can increase the anterior and posterior diameter for inspiration, so the lungs can inflate, okay? It allows the lungs to better inflate. It makes room, let's just say that. It makes room in the thorax for the lungs to fill up. Okay, so the external intercostal muscles. The external, because all these, the muscles in between the ribs are your intercostal muscles, right? That's why we talked about intercostal space when we did EKGs, right? Now, the external intercostal muscles will lift up or spread out the thorax. When it spreads it out, it allows the lungs to have room to inflate, right? So that's how they aid in inspiration. The external intercostal muscles will open up that thorax, makes the anterior posterior diameter greater, right? The AP, so you might see that as AP, that's anterior to posterior diameter, okay? The external intercostal muscles will contract and increase the AP diameter of the thorax, which allows the lungs more room to inflate. That's how they aid in inhalation. Okay? Now, the internal intercostal muscles will contract and bring it back down. Okay? They pull the ribs in, down and in to aid in exhalation. Okay? The internal intercostal muscles aid in exhalation by pulling the ribs down and in. Okay? So when you breathe in, those external intercostal muscles is what made your ribs get bigger. And when you let go, those internal intercostal muscles pull them ribs back down. Okay? That's what happens. That's what happens on the internal and external intercostal muscles. They aid in ventilating. And these are not accessory muscles. These are just ones that aid the diaphragm. We haven't gotten to accessories yet. Okay? This is just normal, quiet breathing. Diaphragm drops about 1.5 centimeters, and the external intercostals will pull them ribs up, and then the internal intercostal muscles will pull the ribs back down. That's what's happening on inhalation and exhalation. Normal, right? Normal, quiet inhalation and exhalation. All right? Any questions on the intercostal muscles? Be sure to remember they're opposite. Okay, when it talks about how it helps, they're opposite. All right. Last part will be the accessory muscles and the expiratory muscles, right? And these, when I say expiratory muscles, we're talking about forced expiration, like to blow out some candles, okay? To blow out some, what muscles do you think you use if you're blowing out candles? Not only do you use your internal intercostal muscles, but what else would you be using? Your stomach, your abdominal muscles. That's what, right? You got to use that. That's forced exhalation. Okay. Well, let's look at the accessory muscles. Now, accessory muscles are used to elevate and stabilize the chest for labored breathing. So now, if I'm in a situation where I'm short of breath and the external intercostal muscles and the diaphragm not enough, I'm still short of breath. Now I'm going to start using my accessory muscles, okay? And those are the ones that you can see. When you're watching somebody, you can see them using accessory muscles, okay? For babies, you will see contractions or retractions, right? The little place right here will suck in when they're trying to breathe, or their stomach will suck in at the bottom, or their nose will start doing that, flaring up. That's called nasal flaring. Those are accessory muscles in a baby. Okay, but in a man or an adult male or female, we have these other muscles that we use. All right, the neck and shoulder muscles are the scalene, sternocleidoid mastoid. I used to. The trapezium, Oh. Yeah. Oh, okay. The trapezium, that's the traps, right? This muscle right here, these little muscles right here are called the trapezius muscles. And pectoralis will be the chest muscle, the pecs, right? Scalene, right in the neck. Sternocleidoid mastoid is also by the scalene. Trapezium is this muscle, these muscles here. And then the pectoralis is the chest muscles. When they are enacted for accessory muscle use during labored breathing. Okay. Now, I have a good picture of that in the PowerPoint. This is the diaphragm. We said can be up to 6 to 10 centimeters during, like, can y'all see my picture? Okay. This is the diaphragm here, right? Remember we said that the right side is up a little higher than the left because of the liver. All right. Now, accessory muscles. This is the sternocleidoid mastoid muscle. The reason why it's sterno, because it's connected to the what? Sternum. So it works by elevating the sternum. It tries to pull that sternum up for you, right? If the external intercostal muscles are not doing enough, then the sternocleidoid mastoid muscle will help by lifting up the sternum at the what? What is part of the sternum is this? Manubrium. Good. It's connected to the manubrium and it tries to pull that sternum up for you. Then you have the scalenes, which kind of help too. And they elevate the what? Upper ribs. So the first couple of upper ribs, they try to help pull them upper ribs up for you. Just trying to do a little set, trying to help you out, right? And then of course your trapezius and your pectoralis are not shown here, but they will help as well. Now notice here, the ups and the downs. Look, external intercostals lift the ribs up and out. See that? And then the internal intercostal muscles pull the ribs down and in. See that? Down and in. All right. And for forced exhalation is the what? What muscles, huh? Abdominal muscles. Here it is right here. Abdominal muscle group is used for what? Forced exhalation. Blowing out the candles. Okay? If I'm going to blow out the candles, I got to use my abdominal muscle group. Now, I'm not going to make you remember all of the abdominal muscles, but you do have the rectus abdominis, external obliques, internal obliques, and transverse abdominis, right? The six-pack. Okay? You got the six-pack. Those muscles are helping for forced exhalation. Abdominal muscle groups are used for forced exhalation. And then, of course, forced inhalation. I threw this in there because this is still accessories, right? If I'm really working, here goes the sternocleidoid mastoid muscle that is lifting up the manubrium, right? On both sides. Then you have your scalenes that lift the first couple of ribs up a little bit. And of course, your external intercostals also aid in inhalation. And then this is showing you your diaphragm, of course, which is the major muscle of ventilation, right? All right, then it gets into types of breathing, which we will talk about on what, Tuesday? Tuesday. All right, so homework over the break. Tomorrow starts your Martin Luther King holiday. You're out of school on Friday and Monday. So over the weekend, this is the homework. I want you to do, we did number one. I think it's just three of this one, right? Homework number two left, right? Yeah. Homework number 2 and homework number 3. Do it the best you can for homework. But not only that, I need you to do the vocabulary on chapter 9. Chapter 9's vocabulary. Look for 1 or 2 of these vocabulary words to be on your exam. So make sure you are looking at these, not only just writing them to be writing them. And also read, guys, Chapter 9 is very well with the accessory muscles. Okay, talks about the accessory muscles really, really well. Okay, and got the pictures and explanation of the accessory muscles. Make sure you're reading. That it's mostly like page 170, page 170 through 174, I think. It's got a lot of your accessory muscle stuff, or 173. 170 through 173 has a good wealth of information in the Egan's book about the accessory muscles. Make sure you're reading those. Now, the vocabulary is on page, it's at the first page, yeah, the first page of chapter 9, which is actually page 151. So homework, vocabulary, page 151. What you do that, of course, you have to email me that one. Take a picture and email, because it's not going to be an upload. It's not in Canvas. Okay. But as far as the, I guess I could have done that, but it's no big deal. Homework number 2 and 3 is what you'll upload in Canvas. I'll send me the vocabulary words via email. Just take a picture and then email me that, and then upload homework 2 and 3 via Canvas. That's your homework for this weekend. And of course, read and study. I know you're gonna be off a couple of days, but this is a good time to really get caught up. Okay. If you already spoke with me about taking the exam that you missed after class today, then as soon as I get through counseling class, you can log back in, because I have to end this class in order for it to record. Okay. And so I think it's just one student. Once I say goodbye, then it's going to log you out, and then you can try to log back in, and then I'll let you in and open it up, the exam for you. Okay. The one that's out on COVID. Now, guys, this is not something we're going to do all the time. Well, my stomach was hurting. Can I take mine online? No, we can't do that. If you have documentation of being out because of the COVID or something like that, then that's when we can make arrangements to try to allow you to do it. Now, every time you take a test and you got COVID, that ain't gonna work. Okay. This is very, very few and in between. All right. So that's the homework. See you on Tuesday for the last little bit of this lecture, a little bit of review. And then Wednesday will be your exam and your lab. Don't forget your times, but we got a little modification in the times. Alpha come at 1, Omega, you can come on in at 2, because it's going to be real short. I might, if everybody comes, we could probably have everybody out here by 3 o'clock. Okay, don't take long, 3:30, something like that, because the hand washing is going to be extremely quick. All right, see you later, and be safe.